We are on chapter 15, my friends. Chapter 15. I'll slide over here so they can hear me a little bit better. I'm going around town. All right. Chapter 15. The Herman W. Block Memorial Library's air conditioning unit did not work very good, and there was only one fan. And from the minute that me and Winn-Dixie got in the library, he hogged the fan the whole time. He laid right in front of it and wagged his tail and let it blow his fur all around. Some of his fur was pretty loose, and it blew right off of him like a dandelion puff. I worried about him hogging the fan, and I worried about the fan blowing him bald. But Miss Franny said not to worry about either, that Winn-Dixie could hog the fan if he wanted, and she had never in her life seen a dog made bald by a fan. Sometimes, when Miss Franny was telling a story, she would have a fit. They were small fits, and they didn't last very long. But what happened was she would forget what she was saying. She would just start to shake like a little leaf. And when that happened, Winn-Dixie would get up from the fan and sit right next to her side. He would sit up tall, protecting her, with his ears standing up straight on his head like soldiers. And when Miss Franny stopped shaking and started talking again, Winn-Dixie would lick her hand and tie back down in front of the fan. Whenever Miss Franny had one of her fits, it reminded me of Winn-Dixie in a thunderstorm. There were a lot of thunderstorms that summer, and I got pretty good at holding on to Winn-Dixie whenever they came. I held on to him and comforted him and whispered to him and rocked him, just the same way he tried to comfort Miss Franny when she had her fits. Only I held on to Winn-Dixie for another reason too. I held on to him so he wouldn't run away. It all made me think about Gloria Dump. I wondered who comforted her when she heard those bottles knocking together, those ghosts chattering about the things that she had done wrong. I wanted to comfort her, and I decided that the best way to do that would be to read her a book, read it to her loud enough to keep the ghosts away. And so I asked Miss Franny, I said, Miss Franny, I've got a grown-up friend whose eyes are going, and I would like to read her a book. Do you have a suggestion? Suggestions, Miss Franny said. Yes, ma'am, I have suggestions. Of course I do. How about Gone with the Wind? Well, what's that about, I asked. Why, said Miss Franny, it's a wonderful story about the Civil War. The Civil War, I said? Do not tell me you've never heard of the Civil War. Miss Franny looked like she was going to pass out. She waved her hands in front of her face. Nathan. I know about the Civil War, I told her. That was the war between the South and the North over slavery. Ah, slavery, yes, said Miss Franny. It was also about states' rights and money. It was a terrible war. My great-grandfather fought in it. He was just a boy. Your great-grandfather? Yes, ma'am. Litmus W. Block. Now there's a story. Winn-Dixie yawned, a really big yawn, and laid down on her side. I swear he knew that phrase. Now there's a story. And he knew it meant that we weren't going anywhere anytime soon. Go ahead and tell it to me, Miss Franny, I said. And I sat down cross-legged next to Winn-Dixie. I pushed him and tried to get him to share the fan, but he pretended he was asleep. And he didn't move. I was all settled in and ready for a good story when the door banged and pinch-faced Amanda Wilkinson came in. Winn-Dixie sat up and stared at her. He tried out a smile, but she didn't smile back, so he laid back down. I'm ready for another book, Amanda said, slamming her book down on Miss Franny's desk. Well, said Miss Franny, maybe you wouldn't mind waiting. I'm telling India Opal a story about my great-grandfather. You are, of course, more than welcome to listen. It'll just be a couple of minutes. Amanda sighed a real big, drastic sigh. She pretended like she wasn't interested, but she could. I could tell. Come sit over here, said Miss Franny. I'll stand, thank you, said Amanda. Suit yourself, Miss Franny shrugged. Now, where was I? Oh, yes, Litmus. Litmus W. Block. Chapter 16. Litmus W. Block was just a boy when the firing on Fort Sumter occurred. Fort Sumter, I said. It was the firing on Fort Sumter that started the war, said Amanda. Okay, I said. Well, Litmus was 14 years old. He was strong and big, but he was still just a boy. His dad, Artley W. Block, had already enlisted in the war, and Litmus told his mom that he could not stand by and let the South get beat. So he went to fight too. Miss Franny looked around the library, and then she whispered, Men and boys, they always want to fight. They're always looking for a reason to go to war. It's the saddest thing. Rylan, my friend, please stop that. They have this abiding notion that war is fun, and no history lesson will teach them differently. Anyways, Litmus went and he enlisted. He lied about his age. Yes, ma'am, like I said, he was a big boy. And the army took him. And Litmus went off to war, just like that. How old was Litmus when he went off to war? 14. How old are you guys? 8 and 9. So in 5 years, that means you would be going off to war.
What?
Pretty crazy, isn't it? Anyway, here we go. He left behind his mom and 3 sisters. He went off to be a hero, but he soon found out the truth. Miss Franny closed her eyes and shook her head. Well, what truth? I asked. Why, the truth that war is awful, Miss Franny said with her eyes closed. I took a look at Amanda, and I looked at her face. Her face was pinched up even more than usual. War, said Miss Franny with her eyes still closed, should be a cuss word. And she shook her head and opened her mouth. She pointed at me, and then she pointed at Amanda. You, neither of you, can imagine what it's like. No, ma'am, Amanda and me said at exactly the same time. Does it sound like Amanda is now getting interested?
Yeah.
It does. You cannot imagine. Litmus was hungry all the time, and he was covered with all manner of vermin, fleas, lice, and in the winter he was so cold he thought he was going to freeze to death. And in the summer, why, there's nothing worse than war in the summer. It stinks so much. And the only thing that made Litmus forget that he was hungry and itchy and hot or cold was that he was getting shot at. And that happened a lot. And he was nothing more than a child. Did he get killed? I asked Miss Franny. Good grief, said Amanda, and she rolled her eyes. Now, Opal, would I be standing in this room telling the story if that happened? I wouldn't exist. No, ma'am. He had to live. But he was a changed man. Yes, ma'am, a very big changed man. He walked back home when the war was over. He walked from Virginia all the way to Georgia. He didn't have a horse. Nobody had a horse except for the Yankees. He walked, and when he got home, there was no home there. Well, where was it? I asked her. I didn't care if Amanda thought I was stupid. I wanted to know. Why, Miss Franny said. The Yankees burned it. Yes, ma'am, they burned it to the ground. Well, what about his sisters? Amanda asked. She moved around the desk and came out on top. What happened to them? Dead. All 3 of them died of typhoid fever. Oh, no, Amanda said in a real soft voice. And his mama? I whispered. She died too. And his dad? Amanda said. What happened to him? He died when he was at war. Litmus was an orphan? Yes, ma'am, Litmus was an orphan. This is a sad story, I told Miss Franny. It sure is, said Amanda. I was amazed that Amanda finally agreed with me on something. I'm not done yet, Miss Franny said. Winn-Dixie started to snore, and I nudged him with my foot to try to make him quiet. I wanted to hear the rest of the story. It was important to me to hear how Litmus survived after losing everything he loved. Bump, bump, bum.